Hey everyone, welcome to episode 38 of the Hybrid Ministries Tech Forum. I'm your host, Marty Atias. And the Hybrid Ministries Tech, hello? Sorry about that. Okay, a little bit of weirdness there. We had an echo. I had an echo coming back at me. So anyway, Hybrid Ministries Tech Forum is where we discuss all matters relating to the challenges and opportunities of streaming worship services and other events of any faith. If you're with us live, your questions and comments help to produce the show and steer the topics that we discuss. If you're with us live on YouTube or social media, get a cell phone or tablet ready. I'm going to put up a QR code on the screen that you can take a shot of, and it'll be important in just a moment, because there are several ways that you can engage with us and with each other during the show and then during the week. The first is by asking questions. You do this in our custom Q&A platform, which is called Mukana, and you can also comment and chat with panelists and with each other. And I'm going to, you'll find a link to that in the Zoom chat, which is the only time we use the Zoom chat, is to post these to direct you to the place you should be going. If you're not on Zoom, if you're with us on YouTube or social, here is that QR code that you can take a picture of, and that'll take you to Mukana, where you can register and sign in. The second way to engage with us is on our Discord. That's our private topic-driven resource and discussion platform. On it, you'll find a wealth of information, technical information, and otherwise that we've been building throughout the series. Info on practices and technical audio, video, camera choices, all kinds of things. It's a great resource. And you can also ask questions and get answers there, pretty reliable ones too. And it also will tell you information about past episodes, where you can find them, what the topics were, and announcements for future episodes. So there's also link to Discord in the Zoom chat, and I'll put that up again in a couple of minutes. If you're with us live on Zoom, you can also stick around after we're done here with the formal show, and we'll have an informal after show with live microphones and such. And if you'd like to participate on our panel in a future show, maybe you can offer a different perspective, experience, or information that our viewers will find helpful. Just get here 30 minutes before showtime, and we'll check you in. So on most Mondays, I host an audio conversations meeting at 3 o'clock Eastern Time. We mostly work on skills for mixing, critical listening, sound editing, system configurations. We cover a lot of ground, but it's pretty casual, and it's mostly geared towards what you bring to the table for questions and information. So that's at 3 o'clock Eastern Time on Mondays. And you can find information on that in the Discord as well. Now, in the before times, doing AV for services usually meant a little more than pushing a few faders up and down, and even that was difficult to recruit volunteers for. Now we have to pay much more closer attention to audio quality for two different audiences, and we have to move and switch multiple cameras and switch and overlay graphics, get a live stream and chat going on time and online. That's a lot of stuff to learn and to be responsible for. Now, a lot of buttons, dials, faders, mouse clicks. Ideally, it can take a large team of people, each person with one job to do, right, to do it well. Practically speaking, however, there are only between 2 and maybe 6 hands to work with. So how do we get that all done and done with fewer people? So that's where automation and smart buttons become really useful. When you can program an entire sequence of events into a single push button, you can get things done faster and more reliably. So we've talked a lot about the Streamdeck and companion software. And I've invited David Chalmers from the Torrance Parish Church in Glasgow, Scotland, where it's currently around midnight, to show us some remarkable things that they have been able to accomplish with theirs. And so I want to welcome David.
Thanks, Marty. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. So, so over there in Scotland, you at the parish church, you were telling me about some really interesting things that you were doing as you set up your audio and video system for streaming. You recognized all the different things that needed to be done, right? And are you using what kind of video switcher and audio board are you using?
Yeah, well, let's jump into that. I'm going to share some slides if that's okay.
Sure.
Just to keep me right, if nothing else, save me going on too long. So I'll take it a step back first, if you don't mind, Marty. We'll just talk a bit about where we came from in this. So as you mentioned, we're a small congregation in a sort of commuter village just outside Glasgow, which is the largest city in Scotland. We've probably got about 80 to 120 worshippers joining in person prior to the pandemic. And up to that point, we had been doing live streaming, but it was audio only. So we were using a service called Mixler, just simply to stream an audio stream mainly to elderly listeners or people who were at home for whatever reason. And it wasn't a big take-up. There was maybe a couple of people a week listening. They appreciated it very much, but it wasn't exactly going very far afield. Obviously, during the pandemic, when we had our lockdown here in the UK, we had Zoom services with everybody at home, and some of our musicians contributing from home with live music. But once the lockdown started to ease, and we were in a situation where we were allowed some people in the church, but not everybody, the church leadership really wanted to enhance the live streaming provision at that point. So they put out a request for some donations. We got about 8,000 UK pounds, which is just over $10,000, which is obviously a pretty decent amount, but not a huge amount. And the requirement was to really reflect the existing service format and structure to online viewers who weren't able to attend in person, with a real emphasis on trying to connect the two together. And the types of things we would have to cover varied from literally, a very simple as a funeral, just with one person speaking perhaps, right up through to some of the more elaborate events and performances that happen in the church building. And as you mentioned at the beginning, we really had to be able to cope with anything from literally, the minister going in and turning everything on himself, up through to having multiple people. And that was a key requirement. People didn't want to have to suddenly have double the size of the tech team just to be able to live stream the service. And there was a preference to stay away from some of the free streaming services and to retain a full control over the streaming experience. And just in case you're wondering, the £8,000, the $10,000 did include some lighting enhancements. Well, when I say enhancements, we had no lighting, no theatrical lighting at all prior to this. We only had the normal overhead lighting in the building. This is where we kind of started from. We already had a digital mixing desk, an Allen & Heath QU16 desk, and a perfectly decent PA system. The Allen & Heath desk had been set up by myself. We did make use of the scene memories so people could recall a known good setting, but the level of technical knowledge among the volunteer operators wasn't very high. For our song projection, we use Proclaim software. I know a lot of people are very familiar with what's the other one? ProPresenter, the one that a lot of people use. We really like Proclaim, mainly because of its cloud sync features that let us collaborate on putting together the presentation rather than one person having to do it all. And Proclaim does have some live streaming features, but we decided those weren't really relevant for reasons that I'll come on to. Unfortunately, the church did have a decent internet connection, so we had a fibre to the cabinet, roughly 80 megabits down, 20 megabits up, so that's perfectly usable. So to answer your question, it took a long time to answer it, but this is kind of where we ended up. So we already had a projector, an AV projector, and an Extron AV switcher, and a Windows 10 laptop that were being used for projecting in the service. And we were very keen to keep that function the same as it had been. Again, there was some volunteers who had just about enough grasp of Proclaim to be able to use it on a Sunday morning, and we didn't really want to confuse them with changing that workflow. The only thing we added was another laptop to allow us to do remote Zoom contributions into the service, and we have had to use that a couple of times, particularly when the person leading the service or the pastor was self-isolating, and we had to bring them in via Zoom into the service. What we then added to that was just 3 cameras. We chose 2 PTZ cameras to give us a bit of flexibility, and then one big wide safety shot, if you like. So those 3 inputs, along with the HDMI output of the Extron switcher, were going into a Blackmagic ATEM Mini Pro, which of course was also getting the an audio mix from one of the buses coming out of the Allen and Heath desk. So that's very standard, nothing particularly remarkable about that.
Well, but I do want to point out, though, I think it's very interesting that you're using a pre-switcher,
yes,
to kind of expand the number of inputs on the ATEM Mini, which only has 4 HDMI
That's correct.
inputs. You're using the Extron as a pre-switcher or an upstream switcher.
Yeah, that's correct. And that means that we have also means we have separate control over what appears on the projector in the church compared to what's on the live stream as well, which is
That's
very
great.
useful.
And I want to just invite people and remind people, if you have any questions at all at any time, go ahead and write them into Mukana, and we'll get to them.
Sure, thanks, Marty. So, in terms of the live streaming, we wanted to have a very easy path to live streaming. So, the ability for somebody to switch on the system, the cameras go to a preset safe shot of the platform at the front of the church. You hit one button on the ATEM and you're streaming. And as I mentioned, we're streaming in up to the Vimeo platform. And then for the Sunday services from there, we also we embed the Vimeo into the Church Online platform, which we find works really well for us and gives you a degree of interaction. It's got comments. People can add comments. They can say hi. They can have a chat there. But it's not quite the sort of Wild West that something like YouTube comments would be. We don't require people to log into that, so they can just put a nickname in. But that's working really well from that point of view. So as I said, that we could have kind of stopped there, but the thing that we got kind of part of the reason why I'm speaking about this is because we kind of went a bit further than that. We added in an M1 Mac Mini. They'd just come out, which was great, and to that we added a Streamdeck button panel, and we kind of got one of these two things right. We got the Mac Mini was a great choice from that point of view. We started off buying a smaller Streamdeck and very quickly realized that was a mistake and we needed to have a larger one. It's kind of Dave's rule of mixing desks and Dave's rule of Streamdecks. Always buy one size bigger than you think you need. So what are we doing with the Mac Mini? Well, obviously it lets us monitor the off-air stream, if you like, but it is doing a whole lot more than that because we've got the BitFocus companion software running, which is acting as a sort of automation layer to control a whole bunch of stuff. So let me go through this, but obviously in a minute we'll jump to the actual companion software. I can show you this in a bit more detail. But the basic idea is that the Streamdeck buttons are being monitored by BitFocus, and that's sending commands to various different what Streamdeck calls, what companion calls instances. So for example, it can send commands to the lighting software that we use that's called Light Key, and in fact those are MIDI commands. And then obviously Light Key is sending out DMX commands over a USB to DMX interface to the actual light fixtures. But it also lets us send Visca commands to the PTZ Optics cameras, so we can do camera positioning. In fact, the original reason we bought the Streamdeck was to give us a sort of low-cost PTZ control panel. And it was only once we'd done that we realized that, oh, hang on, there's a whole lot more we can do with this. Companion can talk to the ATEM switcher. And in fact, in a normal service, I never touch the ATEM control panel at all. Everything is being driven off the Streamdeck. Some of the other volunteers do. They like to cut on the ATEM. That's absolutely fine. But as I say, everything is abstracted up into the companion app. And then the thing that was the kind of light switch, a light bulb that turned on in my head, was when I realized that we could have full control over channel muting on the Allen and Heath mixing desk from Companion. So initially I was doing this with MIDI commands, but actually during the time we've been using this, somebody's actually written a dedicated Allen and Heath instance for Companion, which has made it much easier to do that. So we have a reasonable degree of control. We can mute and unmute channels, we can mute and unmute buses, we can adjust fader levels individually. That's been a real big success. So that's a bit voice companion. Obviously, the ATEM is being controlled over Ethernet, but we also take the USB output of the ATEM, the USB-C output, into the Mac as well, which then presents the ATEM output as like a webcam into the Mac Mini. This is to get round the fact that the ATEM, this ATEM obviously only has one HDMI output. So if you want multiple outputs, you have to think a bit laterally. So in our case, we take advantage of the fact that on Macs, certainly, you can share a webcam source across multiple apps. So in fact, we have both OBS running, which we only use for local record. So obviously we stream up to Vimeo. Vimeo is recording during the live to allow people to watch again at a later date. However, if the internet went down in the church, for example, we would lose that stream. So in order to have a local recording that we could upload later, we use OBS. And then we also have the same webcam source going into Zoom, and we use that specifically for people who want to phone in on a normal phone and listen along to the service. We have one or two particularly elderly people. They have no internet connection, they have no devices, and it allows them just to dial a phone number and phone in for that. So I guess in a way it's kind of ironic that we've got this Mac Mini running OBS, but we're not using it for streaming at all. All the streaming is happening via the embedded encoder in the ATEM Mini Pro. And then of course we have, because it's a computer, we can have a web browser running with both the Vimeo page, a Church Online page, Planning Center, which we use for the sort of run a show service stuff. And much to the annoyance of some of the operators, I do sometimes go in and change the companion settings during the service, which they get really mad about. So just a few photographs just to give you a nice sense of it. This is the building itself. It's not a huge building. This is laid out for when we had social distancing. This is the actual setup at the sound desk. Obviously we're stuck in the back corner, as many folk are. Notice the essential refreshments for Sunday morning. That's very important. And you can see the setup here. Here's the Streamdeck. Here's the ATEM, which it is in a position that you could jump on and push a button if you had to. But I'm also using this iPad is running the Allen and Heath remote control app for the desk. So sometimes we'll talk about staffing, but sometimes I'm on the sound desk over here. Sometimes I'm on the live stream, but it lets me just jump in and tweak things. If I've got a volunteer operator who's maybe a little less confident, I can jump in and make some tweaks. And then obviously the ATEM multi-view output here, and the Mac Mini software here. This laptop down here is just a standard Windows 10 laptop. That's what's running the Proclaim output, which is feeding the projector, which you'll see in a minute, but it's also using a display link output to also feed a Confidence monitor TV that's on the wall behind here. I realised I didn't take a picture, a reverse shot, to let you see the whole thing, but never mind. So here's a shot of the system in action. This is a Sunday morning service. Our ministers in full flow. And it gives you a sense. So you can see on the screen here, we're monitoring the Church Online platform. We can see any comments coming in from people either having trouble with the stream or just saying hi to each other. We've got our run of show software running in a web browser. That's the planning center. And here's OBS running, and here's Zoom running as well. So let's talk about the Streamdeck. So the real, as I said, the light bulb moment for me was when I realized that the combination of the Streamdeck plus the companion software let me abstract a lot of the functions. I guess folk are familiar with the idea that you map a software button onto a physical button on the Streamdeck, and that's great. But the real power of this comes when you think about a higher level than that. So instead of thinking about individual functions like cutting up a source on the Atem, you think about combinations of functions that are to do with different parts of the service. So I probably put the most work of anything into just thinking through this layout for the Streamdeck panel to try and make it logical to the operators. So let me just talk through a couple of things, and then I'll jump in and I'll show you in the actual GUI how those are programmed. So for example, these three white buttons up here, they let you start the stream at 1 minute until the start of the service. They let you cut from a full screen shot of the announcement slides to a wide shot of the church. But what they're also doing is things like muting and unmuting the Atmos mic, muting and unmuting all the vocal mics, so nobody ever gets caught, chatting to their fellow worship band member, live on mic when they shouldn't be live. And that really helps to give the volunteers confidence that they're not going to, push the wrong mute button and things are going to go horribly wrong. The real core of this is the blue buttons. Those are ones which really are different elements within the service. So, for example, here, somebody is standing talking. They're talking at the lectern, and we're going to use camera 2 to pick them up. And I'll go through in a minute what all the different steps involved in that. And the real focus of the blue buttons is that I don't know what the right word for this is, but basically they don't assume any prior knowledge. So that if you hit a blue button, it's going to assume that that nothing is set up properly. It's going to go through every single step to make sure that that what's needed at that exact point is what's going to happen. That's slightly different from the green buttons. The green buttons are what I call modifiers. So for example, somebody's standing at the lectern, they're talking about an event that's coming up later in the week, and the Proclaim operator has put a slide up on the projector. Then you would just push the green button and it would cut the Atem to go full screen on the Proclaim output. But it wouldn't change any of the audio. So blue buttons change audio and video, green buttons only change video. And then the red buttons are to do with picture-in-picture. So we use the macros in the Atem to give us different picture-in-picture settings. And then those are controlled there. So for example, somebody's standing at the lectern, you'd be on this blue button here, but then they start reading from the Bible, then you would push this red button and it would bring the Bible words, which are being shown by Proclaim, full screen, and make the person speaking a little picture-in-picture in the corner. Or equally, if the minister is giving a sermon, will be using this blue button. He'd be using the radio mic. He might be standing at the lectern, but also he quite likes to wander around sometimes. And he has some sermon slides. In that case, we would use this button, which would leave him full screen, but put the sermon slides as a little picture-in-picture in the corner. So we're dynamically changing the picture-in-picture options. And then we have a kind of safety buttons down the corner. We can mute the stream if somebody starts oversharing. and we think, oh, actually, that's not appropriate to go out in a live stream. We could just mute the audio. We can mute the band if somebody kicks over the bass guitar and it's sounding horrible. Then we could at least mute that on the stream. And then this is the kind of ultimate panic button. If something, somebody falls ill in the church, for example, we can mute the stream, and we put up a slide that on the ATEM, using the ATEM's built-in graphics. What do they call it? Media player, and it just says, "Oops, something went wrong. We'll be back with you shortly." That kind of thing. And really, the only concession to single function buttons are these 4 yellow ones at the top, which just let you cut up one of the sources on the preview window. So sometimes for the more advanced users, they like to basically have a bigger picture so they can set up their camera shots. And that lets them do that. So, sorry, that's quite a lot to take in, but I think it probably makes more sense.
That's really interesting. So what strikes me, first of all, before we get into the actual program.
Sure.
So you mentioned that working through the layout was one of the biggest challenges. And I can really see that, because it's apparent that you had to think through all the different scenarios about where people could be, what microphones they could be talking into, what camera shots you would want to get when somebody is standing at those positions. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how many steps or functions you've buried into individual buttons. Yeah.
Sure. Yes, and initially I was thinking along the lines of, we'll just automate everything. We'll just make it so that when you change a slide in Proclaim, it'll step through the service in a predictable order. And I very quickly realized that that's not how people work. That's how computers work, but it's not how people work. So things would change. People would have decide to do things in a different order. So there had to be a degree of flexibility, but not complete flexibility, because that was too much. It was overwhelming for people. I basically would need a video director every week, and we don't have that. So I had to strike this balance between enough options to cover what you typically expect to happen, but not go crazy with it. Not have pages and pages. I kind of set myself an artificial limit to say it has to fit on one page. You can't go to multiple pages. The exception to that, which I'll show you, is the camera control. So there is a dedicated page for each camera to go into detail to set the presets and adjust the cameras. But in terms of the normal run of the service, I said let's make it just one page and stick to that.
That's
so to pick up
to
pick up on your point. So here, let's take some examples, and please, folk, if you're interested in knowing what a particular button does underneath, then just let us know in the questions, and we'll cover that. So here's an example. So the first one. So we're going to start the stream, typically 6 minutes before the service. That just happens to be what we picked. So over in this panel is what happens when you push that button on the Streamdeck. So as I said, it doesn't make any assumptions. It turns the picture-in-picture off. It recalls the necessary presets on the 2 different cameras. It sets the ATEM, switches the ATEM to the input 1, which is the full screen Proclaim projection output. It then goes and mutes a bunch of different things on the mixer. So it mutes both Group 1 and Group 2. Group 1 is the band. Group 2 is specifically, sorry, let me be clear. It mutes Group 2, which is all the singing mics and all the speaking mics, so that you can be confident that when you go live, nobody's going to be talking, into a mic. But it unmutes the band, so the band can play before the service, but there's people singing. We don't usually have people singing before the service. So all the speaking mics are off, but the band inputs on the mixer are on. And then other things like the pastor mic, the lectern mic, the PC input and so on. Those are all muted together. And this one here, we're adjusting the level of, this is the Atmos mic. So we turn the Atmos mic off at this point, just so it doesn't pick up anybody's, chat happening before the service. Then finally, I notice this is 2 seconds later. So this column, the way that Streamdeck works, Companion works is all the commands fire at the same time unless you put a delay in to tell them when to fire. So in this case, I'm spacing out the mute commands. I actually don't think that's really needed, but never mind. But I let everything settle. I let the cameras go to position, and then 2 seconds later, I tell the ATEM to start streaming. I also tell the lighting software to fade up the stage lights, and that's the cue. Instead of, we kind of thought about, well, do we have a big on-air sign at the back of the church? That feels a little bit, funny. So the cue is, if you're on stage and the lights come up, you're live. That's how you know. And then the last thing here, that Companion tells OBS to start recording. So the operator does not need to remember to start recording, and that happens automatically when they do that. So that's one example. Let's jump to a blue button, because as I said, those are really the core of the service. So let's pick this one here. So this is what you would press if somebody walks up to the lectern at the front of the church. They're going to speak using the lectern mic, and you want the camera to switch to them on a nice, mid shot or a close-up shot. So again, we make sure the picture-in-picture is off, because we can't assume that it's off. We have to be sure of that. We tell the ATEM, in this case, we don't cut to we're going to use we're going to take the shot from the lectern. Sorry, we're going to take the shot from the lectern on camera 2, but that's not what we do first. The first thing we do is cut to camera 4, which is the big wide. So we when I say cut, we actually mix to it, but never mind. We mix to the wide. That lets us then change the camera shots, because we can't assume that the camera 2 is already on the lectern. It might be on something else at this point. So we cut to the wide. We do an auto transition on the ATEM. We then move camera 2 to what we think it should be, which is the lectern. We also move camera 3, the other PTZ camera, to the shot we think we're going to need after that. And then 3 seconds later, which gives the PTZs time to move into position, we then switch the preview to input 2 and cut and mix up input 2. So what you see in the live stream is a fade to the wide. You will see the wide as typically as people are walking up to the platform or coming off the platform, and then 3 seconds later you see a mix to the mid shot of the person standing at the lectern. And it's the same every time. It never changes. And I don't think anybody cares, because that doesn't matter. You get a sense of people coming up and people going down. It's a nice, leisurely pace, let's say. It's exactly the same every single time you press that button. But because it kind of looks like it's meant, it works. Obviously, we don't wait. So as I say here, it's 3.2 seconds in before you actually get to the shot of the person standing at the lectern. However, we immediately change the audio muting. So we immediately unmute the lectern mic. We immediately mute all the other mics. So what we say to the operators is, you push the buttons based on the audio, and the cameras look after themselves. So if somebody says, let's take an example. Well, let's say we've just finished a song. So the band have finished playing, that's great. The band have finished. Somebody's walking up to the lectern to give the notices. As soon as the band have finished playing, you hit the button. So the audio is sorted immediately. The cameras follow along automatically afterwards, and you don't get any jarring transitions. You don't get any people being cut off on the mics. So again, we have a bunch of mutes and unmutes, and in this case, we change the Atmos mic to with the room mic, if you like. We fade it up a bit so that you can get a bit of background noise there. So the hardest thing really was working out all these timings and working out what had to happen before everything else. But as I say, the good thing is, once you have figured out that sequence, you never touch it again, because it remains the same. And initially, some people kind of said, "Well, is that not a bit boring? Is that not a bit, taking the creativity out of everything?" And I think my answer would be, well, no. I think it's putting just enough creativity in that people can reflect what's happening without being completely overwhelmed. The reason that in broadcast you pay directors and vision switcher operators so much money is because they're able to do things, immediately. That's an unrealistic expectation for volunteer operators. So this is our balance, and this is what we've been trying to strike in terms of allowing some flexibility. So, for example, if the pastor decides, right, okay, in the middle of his sermon he decides to wander off and stand more in the middle of the platform to make a point, at that point the operator just presses this button, platform wide toggle, and all that does is cut up the camera. Instead of being on camera 2, he's now on camera 3, which is a wider shot of the whole platform. It doesn't change his mic. He's still on the mic. Well, actually, that's a bad example. So he probably would be. He would be on the radio mic. So he would go from this one to this one. In fact, so you can still follow what's happening. You can still cope with changes to the service. You can still adjust things if somebody stands in a slightly different position each week. It's still able to handle that. I'll talk briefly about the camera stuff because that's quite interesting as well. The way we handle camera shots, and this is probably the bit that we're kind of still working out, to be honest. We have a bunch of predefined presets. So what's that? 8, I think, in total. Again, I kind of set an arbitrary limit and said, look, let's not go crazy. Let's just have 8 presets so we can cover the band, we can cover people standing at the lectern, we can cover people standing on the platform. And the process is, before the service, the operator comes in, they recall each of the presets, have a look at it. If they think it's a bit off or somebody's changed it from the previous week, they just use the camera controls down here to zoom in or out, to pan and tilt around till they're happy that that's a usable shot, and then they hit the red button to save that preset for that particular week. A couple of things I've added in here since we started. We found that the varying lighting conditions in the church were sometimes a challenge. So this is an iris up and down. So dark means close the iris. Bright means close the iris. Sorry, got that wrong. That was a bit of a bit tricky to do because the PTZ optics cameras. Sorry, I'm jumping around, but you're kind of relying on what people have programmed into these instances. So there's a Visca over IP instance, but it isn't a PTZ optics instance. So some of the commands work and some of the commands don't work, and you kind of have to figure that out. So once I'd realized that the best way to control the camera brightness was just on the iris control. That's what I put in there. And then I also added the ability to do manual focus. So most of the time we leave the cameras in autofocus because it just works most of the time. Sometimes it doesn't work, it starts hunting. And at that point you would jump into this menu, you'd go into manual focus, and then you would adjust it manually. And then of course you would save that with the preset. Most people don't bother with that. They just let the autofocus do what it likes. And again, it's kind of trying to have realistic expectations of, I don't really want people to be worrying about having to jump in here and be adjusting the cameras for the entire service. That's not what they're there to do.
Question for you, David. The iris and zoom controls and the autofocus, near and far focus, are those stepping buttons? Do you press them a series of times to get to it, or do you hold it to where you want to be and then let it go?
Yeah, that's a good point. Those are setting as steps. So you push the button. So let's take an example. Here's dark. It just sends an iris down one step command. Mm-hmm. I did play around a little bit with trying to make it so that you could hold, and if you hold it down, it just repeats the command multiple times. The PTZ optics cameras are not brilliant for that, to be honest. If you change the iris, you see it. It's a step on the vision, which is not great, but that's one of the limitations of the camera, which again it's perfectly acceptable. What I have done though on the focus, for example, I'm not using the standard focus command as part of the companion instance. I'm actually sending a custom Visca command The reason I'm doing that is because it dials, there's a speed control on that. So I can send it a command to say, focus as slow as you possibly can. And that lets me just nudge it in or just nudge the focus. What I don't want is to go suddenly for it to go completely out of focus. That would look terrible in live. So I had to look up the PTZ Optics manual. I found out the custom command to say focus near as slow as you possibly can, and that's what those two are implemented as.
Yeah, I can imagine that stepping through focus would be very imprecise.
Exactly. Right, let me just jump back to here, and I'll just finish up on this, and then hopefully if folk have got questions, we can address those. So how has it been working? Well, pretty well, to be honest. Apart from me keeping on, not knowing when to stop fiddling with it, that's probably the main problem. But for example, I just discovered the other week that I can actually remotely control the Extron switcher, which is the upstream AV switcher that Marty pointed out. I can control that from Streamdeck as well, so that gives us some additional options. We're pretty happy with Vimeo as a platform. That's working well for us because it does both the live stream and the watch again. We do have the ability via Vimeo to restream to both YouTube and Facebook Live, and that's something that we have been thinking about. But we're not super keen on doing that for reasons to do with just the general business ethics of both of those organizations that we don't necessarily want to be associated with. The system, I have run the whole system on my own. It's very stressful, to be completely honest, because if everything works well, it's fine. As soon as anything goes awry or anything unexpected happens, it unravels very, very quickly. So I don't recommend it, and I don't try not to do it, but it is possible. Our normal staffing at the moment, while folk are still getting up to speed with it, is in fact a live stream operator who essentially is driving the stream deck and monitoring the off air and so on. A sound person. And the way that it tends to work is I either have a more experienced live stream operator and a less experienced sound person, or the opposite, a more experienced sound person and a less experienced live stream operator, and they kind of complement each other. And then we have one person driving the proclaim for the projection. That works well because we have a bunch of existing operators who know how to use proclaim, but it also means that there's one person out of those three who's always focusing on what's happening in the church and not on the live stream. And that can sometimes be important. What isn't working well, I mean, it's not a surprise that getting more people involved is always a challenge. But it's funny, just having a stream deck sitting there, people start to notice that, and people who are into gaming or people who are into live streaming, they go, oh, you've got a stream deck, what's that all about? And that's actually been a sort of way in for some people. The ATEM Mini Pro has generally worked okay. Every now and then it goes weird and we have to reboot it. Not during a service so much, but usually when we initially start live streaming, sometimes it just loses the plot and we have to reboot that. But fortunately not very often. I mentioned already about the focus hunting. That's probably the biggest limitation, I think, of the PTZ Optics cameras is the focus hunting. And people get the hang of the Stream Deck very quickly. People take a while to learn what good framing looks like. So if you're framing up somebody in a shot, what looks okay and what looks kind of weird, and that's actually much more of a challenge to get people to get their heads around that. And on the lighting, I didn't really mention the lighting side, sorry about that, but we are using DMX over wireless, and every now and then it just loses the plot for a couple of seconds, which the plan is eventually to replace that with wired, but it was just a step too far for us. I realised I completely missed one thing, which is how we're sending audio from the audio desk into ATEM, and we've kind of gone for a full circle on that, because we started off sending a post-fade mix on a bus into the ATEM. I then got very involved in making it a pre-fade bus and being able to control it using the iPad, so that you can have a different mix for the live stream. In the end, that just became unmanageable, because I couldn't. If I was able to have another person in another room who was able to monitor properly, that would be ideal. We don't. So the person at the sound desk has to also monitor the live stream, and if you've ever tried that, you know it's pretty hard to do. So we've actually reverted back. We make heavy use of a mix bus compressor on the mix to just bring all the levels to a reasonable level, and make sure that when people are talking, it's loud enough, and when the band's playing, it's not too loud. And the combination of that mix bus compressor plus a little bit of offsets on the post fade mix bus, at the moment that's working well enough for us, and we're happy to leave it at that. And I don't need to add an extra person every week.
Yeah, doing offsets on the mixed sends makes a big difference.
Yeah. So if you look at the mix, basically the band is all down and the speaking mics are all up, for example, just to get that balance. All right, and this is just the last slide. This is really stretching things. This is adding a software called QLab into the mix, which is a sort of show control software. This is a musical theatre production that was happening in the church at Christmas time, and we're using QLab running on the same Mac Mini. It's firing off audio cues. It's doing the muting, automatic muting of the mics for up to 10 performers who all had headset mics. It's also firing all this lighting cues to the light key software. And really all that, I was standing there. It took a long time to program. I'm not going to pretend it didn't. But during the performances, we had a total of 6 performances, and during each performance, I was just pressing one button for the whole thing. And apart from somebody else who was on the Proclaim laptop playing in videos, I was the only operator for the entire thing.
So you're using Proclaim for order of service functionality, and you're using QLab mainly for lighting, or are you doing other things with QLab as well?
No, we were also doing. So the Proclaim was just doing the visuals on the screen. QLab was doing all the audio cues, so sound effects, music play-ins, all that kind of stuff. It was also muting and unmuting all the mics, both for the performers, but also for the live band, and it was sending lighting cues as well. Yeah. But in that case, the cues were all in light key. All that QLab was doing was sending a MIDI take next cue command.
And so just so people have a better understanding, can you give us like an overview of what QLab is and what it's capable of?
Yeah, of course. So it's, as I say, it's really it's a show automation software. It's designed for theatres, for live performances, where you have the ability to pre-set everything in advance. So it's kind of it's sort of Streamdeck on steroids, really. You define all the individual cues, but then each cue can be multiple different things happening. So in that way, it's very similar to the companion buttons, that you're just saying, go to the next thing that's going to happen, and the next thing that's going to happen might be to unmute 5 microphones, play a sound effect, and fade up a lighting cue. And you have a lot more granular control over the timing of that. And to give you an idea, over the 2 acts of this performance, there was something like 1,200 individual actions happening during the show. So you can get pretty complicated with that. But from an operator point of view, I was simply watching the top line here, where it told me what the person was what I just was going to say. And when they'd finished saying their line, I hit next, and everything happened, which made the whole thing massively more straightforward. I'll mention one last thing, if I may. A late addition, we added this tiny little DMX lighting control panel, and a little switch that lets switch between the PC controlling the lights and this lighting desk, so that if somebody comes in for a funeral or something, and they don't want to have to work, or they don't know how to work the PC, they can just switch to the little manual desk and fade up on that.
Nice.
All right, I think that's me. Oh,
Wow,
sorry. I'll just mention one last thing.
Oh,
if there's time, Marty, am I okay to keep going? One more slide?
Yeah, keep going. Yeah.
So this is thinking about resilience. So in my day job, this is a big deal that I have to think about. How do we build in resilience to this kind of thing? So this is taking the sort of the basic stream, the path through the system. So you come from a camera, you go into the Atom, you obviously add the sound, you go via the internet, being monitored by the Mac Mini, you go to Vimeo, you go to Church Online. What happens if any part of that chain fails? Well, let's think about that. So if Church Online goes down, then we still have Vimeo. So we would just redirect people to look at the stream on Vimeo. What if Vimeo goes down? Well, in that case, we're already running a Zoom meeting, so we would just in the chat on Church Online, we just say, oh, everybody jump onto Zoom, and they would go to Zoom. We're still doing a local record in OBS, and once Vimeo was back up, or more likely, let's be honest, Vimeo, maybe our account got locked out for some reason or something. Once that's back up, we would just upload that local recording. Down here, what if the Atom dies? Well, in that case, we would take a PTZ straight into the Mac Mini using just a little HDMI to USB adapter. We'd use the webcam function in Vimeo to upload directly from the web page, and then we could carry on with that. What if the Mac Mini dies? Well, in that case, we don't need it for the stream. We can just go directly from the Atom via the internet to Vimeo and Church Online. And I guess we would just monitor on a phone or a tablet or something. What happens if the internet goes down, which has actually happened? In that case, we would either just tether an iPhone to the Atom, which you can do to give that an internet connection, or tether a phone to the Mac Mini and go via that route. So it's just trying to think through, don't wait till something goes wrong before you think how you're going to work around it. Have a plan in place that we know what we need to do, and have the right cables and the right bits and pieces in place.
That's a level of planning that you would think would be essential, right? I wonder how many other churches and synagogues and houses of worship have thought that far ahead. That's quite remarkable.
No, thank you.
And makes perfect sense too.
All right. Thanks for your patience, folks, for listening through that, and happy to take any questions.
Sure. So we do have a couple of questions that have come in. The first one is from Douglas Sweetser. Says, I have set up 3 lower thirds: preacher, music director, and religious educator. Do you have that functionality, or do you want it in the future?
Yeah, that's a great question, Doug. We don't use lower thirds at the moment. It would be nice. One thing I should have mentioned is, for example, when the band are playing for worship, we have big words and small band. We don't overlay the words over the band. Our feeling is that at that point people should be focusing on the words, not on the band. But yeah, I can see sometimes if folk are, somebody doesn't introduce themselves, for example, and folk are wondering, well, who's this? Who's talking? Yeah, that might be nice to have lower thirds. So that's a good suggestion. I'll definitely have a look at that.
I know a lot of congregations have multiple ministers, and other people from the congregation, lay leaders, and others who come up to do things, who may or may not introduce. And even if somebody does introduce themselves, if they're talking for, several minutes, it might be nice to identify them. That's a great idea. Thank you, Doug. Next question is from Ray Franklin in Mount Dora, Florida, and he says, this is very sophisticated. How long has it taken you to get it this far?
Yeah, I kind of alluded to this, Ray, that this has been a gradual process to build up to that. The good thing, I guess, was that from day one, we had the basic functionality of being able to stream via the Atom. And really the layers of sophistication on top of that have been what's enabled other people to be involved. So for the first probably 3 months, kind of I was the only person who could actually operate things. But now over time we've built that up to more people. So what I'm talking about right now, this is probably 6 months work to get to this.
And I'd say that's pretty good. 6 months work. You know, it's
It helps that this kind of thing is kind of my day job as well, so that helps.
There you go, a ringer. Yeah, so you showed us all the steps that it took to program the sequence of events into each of the buttons. And, you know, okay, that's not terribly complex. You need to know what the functions are, you need to know what the commands are, but that's all findable. What is maybe not so intuitive and takes really logical process of thinking through is what are all the steps, breaking them all down, and then what order do you put them in, and then how much of a delay do you need from one step to the next step, right, to give it time to complete. But the most remarkable thing is, what are the functions of the buttons? What functions do I want to have? And that's where this stands out to me, because a lot of us, I'll venture, and even myself, I'll admit, think about single functions. You know, I want to bring a scene up in OBS, and in a scene like an app window, I may have several apps as sources in the scene, and I'll choose one source. Or if there's a super picture-in-picture involved, maybe I'll have 2 sources, and I'll have another button that says like make this source visible or invisible, right? Thinking that maximum flexibility is the key. But as you pointed out, when you're working with volunteers who don't have enough knowledge about A, the equipment, B, the order of service and where people are going to be and when and how, and the variable of variations from week to week according to the minister's whims, right? That becomes very difficult to have that much flexibility and that many choices for people to have to find, okay, well, where is that button now? How do I do that?
Yeah.
You've made it very straightforward to run a service by saying this is the what certain things are going to happen when you push this button, and you know they're going to happen. You know they're going to happen right because there's the podium, there's the pulpit, there's the choir, there's the band, right?
Yeah.
And if there's a variation, you figured out, well, what are the limits of that variation, right? And you've been able to program that. Like that variation, if the minister wants to walk around, they're going to walk around within a defined area. And you've selected a camera shot that's wide enough to cover that area, right? And that's a variation of a basic setting that you've got. That's great.
Well, and that's obviously that's evolved over time. I'll give you an interesting point. When we started this system, we had our previous pastor, who then retired in the middle of working through this, and we moved from an older pastor who was pretty predictable in exactly what would happen in the service, now to a much younger pastor who is much less predictable and moves around a lot more and doesn't, thinks up new things to do on the way to church in the morning. So we've had to adapt. So I've had to change. I thought I had it all locked down. Then we get a new pastor, and I have to change it all because he wants to do different things and he wants to go about things a different way. So that's been interesting, but also, as much as I kind of hate doing it, I'll rewatch every service and I make notes of like, oh, that didn't work, and I'll change that preset for next week. And my goal is that you kind of never notice the streaming, so you never see a camera move. You never think, oh, why is his mic not on? You know, you want to make it as transparent as possible so that the message is getting across and that the experience of the service is getting across. And I'll mention just one little thing that we changed. So we put this work in, and obviously over time the COVID restrictions have been lifted and the number of people in the service has increased. But we still have a significant number of households, something like 30 households, who are regularly connecting online. And we thought, well, how do we kind of bridge the gap between the people who are online and the people in the service? And one very simple thing, I think like probably quite a lot of software, the Proclaim lets you put in lets you have a little number that comes up in the corner of the screen. If it's usually used for children's ministries, you know, if there's people get a ticket when the kids go into children's ministry, and you just very subtly put that number up if somebody needs some help or whatever. So we decided, well, we don't use that for that function. Let's instead make that the number of people who are watching online. So during the service, the live stream operator just updates that number to reflect the number of people that are watching online. So the people sitting in the service have a visual reminder that there's people online who are also watching, who are part of the congregation and part of the experience.
That's great. All right, we got another question here from Ray Franklin in Mount Dora, Florida. How is the news about Vimeo affecting your use of it going forward? Vimeo is telling creators to suddenly pay thousands of dollars or leave the platform.
Yeah, I saw that, Ray. That's a little concerning, I have to be honest. It's not affected us directly yet. You know, we're not a big user. We're streaming probably for an hour and a half, you know, once a week. But yeah, that kind of feels a bit weird, doesn't it? And I kind of have to get to the bottom of that. Obviously, Vimeo are targeting an enterprise business market. That's where they see themselves going forward. It would be a real shame if in doing that they abandon some of the creator market and abandon small users like us, because we really value being on a platform that where the platform doesn't want to get in front of the audience. So already it's quite, I mean, it's not very expensive, but it's quite expensive. So far I've been able to persuade the church leadership that was money well spent. If that goes up a lot, then we're going to have to rethink that, and I don't know what we do at that point. Maybe we move to one of the other services like Resi or some of these other people, I don't know.
Do you ever see a point where you might say that, you know, Zoom is a platform that is usable? Or YouTube or something more conventional?
Yeah, maybe.
Like that.
Maybe. I mean, because we did Zoom, and then we did not Zoom, and the quality we could achieve on not Zoom was pretty compelling for us. So I think,
particularly for audio, I suppose, right?
Especially for audio, yes, absolutely. Yeah. So I think it would be a big step for us to go back to that. Of course, if the Zoom platform changes and is more, you know, focused on live streaming quality over immediacy, then yeah, that's something we would definitely look at.
Yeah, we have a 1080 account. That's what we're watching now, but
Okay.
that's hard to get.
Yeah,
that's hard to get for the average user. You have to buy 10 accounts in order to get 1080, and then, you know, maybe they'll give it to you.
Yeah, sure.
Still doesn't it? You know, audio isn't any better. Audio is decent. It's decent. I've heard pretty good music audio on Zoom, but it's not easy to get. I've heard worse audio on other platforms too. But yeah, there are different levels of streaming providers. Like, you know, there are those that cater specifically to broadcast and very high-end corporate enterprise, like you were saying. And those, and also, you know, below that there are independent production companies that stream out, and creators, lots of creators who stream out. That's kind of the mid band where Vimeo was. And then there's the lower tiers that are lower cost, and a lot of church streaming providers out there that are actually buying time from other platforms. And you can find lots of different comments and stories of people's experiences with those lower platforms, right? Okay, so if there are any other questions, please bring them on about any part of the what David has shown us, or any other questions that you might have about automation, about Streamdeck, about streaming, about audio operation. We have some expertise here, and so we're happy to answer questions. Let's see. So there was a question that I wanted to ask. The Stream Deck and companion software, how have you found it to be extremely reliable, very reliable, somewhat reliable? Have they caused any issues where you went to do something and it didn't work?
I would have to say extremely reliable. We've never had any issue with Stream Deck or the companion control. That's worked incredibly well. In stark contrast, I have to say, to OBS, which crashes pretty regularly. Now, okay, we're making it hard because we're running it on a M1 Mac, which is obviously a little bit of a niche. But yeah, OBS crashes all the time. Companion never crashes.
Interesting. Good to hear. When you have Companion running on Stream Deck, there's some additional firmware software that you need to install sometimes, depending on the functionality, called WebSockets. Did you have to install anything like that? Oh, but it's on a Mac, so it may not. On a PC,
no, I don't think so. No, what you do have to do is to go and look at the instances, and because most of the instances are user created, you have to kind of keep an eye on that. I gave an example earlier where originally I was sending individual MIDI commands to the mixing desk to mute and unmute the mics. It was only after months of doing that I realized that somebody had added a specific Allen and Heath instance that actually was much more usable. I didn't have to have a little lookup table of, that input is MIDI command, whatever. And that's really nice. That makes it a lot easier. So I would say if you're thinking about going down this route, the first thing to do is make a list of your kit, and then go and look at the different instances that are available in Companion and see what's covered. Don't forget, however, that there's a whole lot of stuff you can do just over MIDI. There's a bunch of stuff you can do over OSC as well. So if you can find a way for the Companion to talk to or send commands to the device that you're trying to control, then obviously that's a prerequisite for making it work.
Yeah, there's tremendous flexibility. The Stream Deck itself its software is kind of like keyboard shortcuts, right?
Yeah.
But then with the integrations, it can send out commands in other languages, such as MIDI and OSC. The Behringer boards run on OSC and can also take MIDI commands. I think the Allen and Heath, maybe just MIDI. I don't know if that takes OSC commands or not.
No, I think you're right.
No,
I think that's MIDI.
Right. And then DMX. And sometimes you can, if it doesn't speak those languages directly, you can find translators that you can load into the computer that will take a command that Companion can issue and then translate that into the language you need to control the device, like DMX, for instance. Now, when you're looking at Companion, it's really important to find the nightly builds download page. When you go to Companion and you just find the download Companion button, it'll be, there'll be a version number there, and that stays the same for a long, long time. But then you'll find under that button, you'll find in real little type, it'll say nightly builds or builds or something like that. I forget exactly what the language is. I guess I could look that up. That will bring you to another page with a whole list of downloadable versions. And the one at the top is the latest version. And you can read that list and see what integrations and what changes were made from build to build. Now, these builds are not the official stable builds, but in my experience, they've been pretty good. And they will update command sets for individual pieces of equipment all the time and add new ones and new ones and new ones, because people are writing these command sets for equipment all the time. So, if you want if you're trying to control a piece of equipment, you want to control a piece of equipment that's not listed, you can ask. In fact, they even say if you're having to enter in specific commands that are not part of our feature set, right? Like David, you were writing in MIDI commands and stuff. Tell us about it. Tell us what you're doing. We will write that as an official release, as an official integration. So they're really good about that, and they've done mixers and cameras and switchers and effects units and instrument units and projectors and TV sets and lighting and all kinds of stuff. It's pretty cool. And we should not forget to mention that in order to take advantage of this amazing technology called a Streamdeck, you don't even necessarily need to buy one, because you can have all of that functionality of all of these buttons on your phone or tablet. There's an emulation program in the Streamdeck software. You download the Streamdeck software. You download the Companion software, and you don't even need the Streamdeck software. Within Companion, you can generate a web page of buttons that are fully functional, that you can bring up in a browser on your computer or on a phone or a tablet. So that's, makes it even sweeter. It doesn't cost anything to get this to work for you, right? Henry, I know you were real interested in this, and you've done quite a bit of Stream Deck work yourself. And you're at one of those churches where the AV team consists of how many people? Oh, we're not hearing you, Henry. You're muted.
Basically two, and he's not there every week.
Oh, nice.
He being a 17-year-old high school senior game computer whiz, without whom I couldn't have done any of this. But my reaction to this presentation was I'm just overwhelmed and very, very impressed. I feel like I'm in kindergarten, but I'll get there, and with this kind of help and these ideas, I'm just really very, very impressed. Thank you very much, David.
No, you're very welcome.
And Henry, you bring up something that we should talk more about, because as you say, doing this to the level that David has accomplished this can be really daunting and can be really complex. Just thinking through the logistics and thinking through the planning can be complex, let alone programming the unit and all the sequences. But you've pointed out that 12 to 17-year-old kids, even older, who are like doing playing these amazing video games, with game controllers, and they're working through some tremendous analysis of gameplay, and whatever kind of game that they're playing. It could be something as simple as a conventional game like golf or basketball, but it could be a war game. It could be strategic. It could be business. It could be anything. And there's the process of playing the game and manipulating the controls, but then there's understanding how the game works and what the expectations are and what the options and all the things that you can do in it, which are not always part of a manual that you can read. Yeah. You've got to learn that on your own. So that capability is tremendous in itself, and in bringing younger people into the AV team to learn and operate this equipment, it can be really cool, and sets them up for a great experience in school as well.
Yeah, I mean, one of the first people to operate it after me was my 15-year-old daughter, who obviously is a bit of a head start, but yeah, that gives you an idea. I noticed John and Douglas have got hands up.
Yeah, I'm just about to let them unmute their microphones. Hang on a second. Okay, John, let's go to you first.
Yes, David, I'm very impressed with your demonstration here, and thank you a lot for showing us things. I'm new at this, and I was wondering if you wouldn't mind screening your overall block diagram where you had the arrows showing the signal paths between each one of the elements, because I'd like to do a screen capture of that. If you put it on, I can just quickly grab a capture of it. So I have
the resilience slide at the end?
No, I think it was his first slide, the one where he showed all the components and the arrows.
David, you're muted.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure, I can do that right now, but I'm also happy to post it up on Discord as well. So.
Oh, okay.
But let me just so that I don't forget, I'll do that right now. There you go.
Yes, that's the one. Now I have to.
On this slide, is the link between the mixer and the Mac Mini, is that USB or something else?
It's both USB and Ethernet. I didn't have time to add a color key, but basically black is HDMI or SDI, green is Ethernet, and whatever the color this is, red is USB, and orange is audio.
What about from the Allen and Heath mixer to the Mac Mini?
That is Ethernet. Actually, no, I'm wrong. I've shown it as Ethernet. That's wrong. It's actually USB.
USB.
Well, I thank you very much. I got it.
Great. Okay, Doug.
Okay, so I just found out today what my church, Unitarian Church in Massachusetts, is getting. They're getting 2 PTZ optics cameras. They're going to get a Roland V1 SDI switcher. They're going to get a Black Magic web presenter. And I started looking at the Roland, and I got a little frightened because apparently there's like a menu system. 16 different menus, and somehow you have to go hunting around, and I don't want to hunt. for these kinds of things. But then you said, oh, you can have more than one video switcher. So I had actually bought one of these, and I know its strengths. I also know its weaknesses. Even though it's got lots and lots of buttons, you're right. You don't actually use many of them. And so that was kind of interesting to me anyway, this idea that just because they buy a switcher, you don't have to insult them and say that switcher's no good. That switcher could do a job. And I got this other switcher that can do other aspects of the job. So so you don't have to get in conflict about with them with that. But I'm just wondering, how do you how much have you documented what your system is? Because it always seems like whatever system you construct, it's very particular to the particular collection of hardware in your building. And when you bring in a new piece, well, then you've got to spend an hour, 2 hours setting up the new thing and disconnecting the old thing and making sure that then people know. So is it just mostly just hands-on and you don't document things? Or, I mean, how do you handle that issue?
Yeah, that's a very good point. And you know, through all of this, I've really had to try and think, okay, what happens if I'm self-isolating because I've got COVID and I'm not there? You know, how are people going to handle that? So I have started to try and document things, and the slide I showed with the sort of exploded view of the Streamdeck buttons and saying what they all did. That's an example of that, where I'm starting to share that with some of the folk and make sure that they have an idea what works. I'll just show you one more slide if you don't mind, from another presentation, which is really the only concrete documentation. I mean, in terms of the wiring of the system, that is it's a bit of a mess, and I'm probably the only person who knows how it all goes together, and that's not ideal, but that's how it is at the moment. But in terms of operating the system, then I am trying to be a bit more hands-on in terms of documenting that. So let me just show you an example of that, see if this works. So this is literally the documentation. So this is page, and it says, for a simple flow, you know, start at step 1, and then go to 2, and then work your way. You know, there's 2 options: 3A and 3B. There's 4A, 4B. There's 5, 6, 7, and so on. So that's enough to get you through a service. It wouldn't be the most exciting live stream you've ever seen, but you'll get through a service. You'll cover all the bases, and you know, it'll be perfectly watchable. And then if you want to take it a bit more, you know, take it up a level, then you start getting into some of the alternates. You start getting into picture-in-picture, and explain it that way. So I'm trying to kind of segregate it to say, okay, if you just want to get something working, you know, what's that? Maybe 9 buttons that you have to learn. And if you want to take it further, then okay, there's another, you know, whatever that is, 9 or 10 buttons. So that's the level I've approached it so far. But I have to say, what's worked best is just been to rota people on at the same time as myself, and I let them drive, and I just stand beside them. You know, so as I mentioned, maybe I'm on the mixing desk, they're on the live stream. You know, we had an 18-year-old last Sunday who did that. It was his first time he'd ever done it. He was pushing the buttons. I was standing next to him, you know, just keeping him right. And I think that's probably been the best way we've found in terms of getting folk up to speed. And I'll just keep doing that a few times, and eventually he'll be perfectly capable of doing it himself.
Remarkable. Okay, we have another question. This one's from Matt Ausbach in Jalisco, Mexico. David, how much effort goes into bulletproofing those command sequences so that they always work no matter what? I tried creating a picture-in-picture button, but somehow the operator was unable to make it work during a service, even though we'd tested it many times.
Yeah, that's a great question. that has been probably, the most required, the most thinking through is, okay, if you can make zero assumptions of what's just happened before this, what sequence of commands do you need to fire to make sure that you can guarantee that every time you press a button, exactly the same thing's going to happen? And early on, that's where all the faults came. But basically, somebody would do something in an order that I hadn't anticipated, or I would do something in an order that I hadn't anticipated, and suddenly we'd have a picture we didn't want, or cut to the wrong camera, or you would see a camera move. And I would just have to go back afterwards and just spend time sitting there going, right, let's try and recreate it. Just follow the sequence. What did I do? Well, instead of pressing this button this time around, I pressed, oh, okay, I see what the problem is. I haven't added this command, or I've done this command too soon. And honestly, that was all just trial and error, just going back through and doing that. So I sympathize with that position, and just taking the time to step through, to try and, the best you can do really is to say, okay, can we recreate the problem? And if it's repeatable, then you've got a chance of going in and seeing what's happening. What's difficult is if you're not there and somebody says, well, it kind of went a bit weird, but they can't tell you what they did before that. That's much harder to debug. But it really was just trial and error to work through those sequences.
Well, this is macro programming, which has a reputation in programming worlds as being the most bug-prone sort of programming one can do. This happens, and then this happens, and this happens. But what was your starting state? And if your starting state description was really different, the results of going through those steps are also different. And so, unfortunately, I think there's an inherent problem there that has to do with the kind of programming that you're doing, really, with this sort of thing.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And you need to try as much as you can to not make assumptions about what the starting state is, and to set the starting state. But again, to mention, the fact that you can, in our case, we can cut away to a safe wide shot. The wide shot never changes. It's a locked off camera. It never changes. It's always safe to go to that. So the first thing you do is you cut to that, and then you can have camera moves and all sorts of things happening to get you ready to then go back into the next shot.
Yeah, wide shot, a fixed wide shot camera is invaluable. It's your safety shot. You can always go to that. Good to have. And if you're low on camera count, as you're doing, it's a way to have an interstitial, what we call an interstitial shot. You come from one camera to the wide, then that first camera is now free to move to go to the next place, and then when it settles down, you can go back to that. So you have a two-camera show that looks really smooth.
That's exactly right, and it really means you can punch above your weight in terms of the number of different shots that you can include, because you can cut away to the wide, and it just works in terms of the flow of the service. Generally speaking, in between sections, maybe somebody else is walking up to the platform to do something. Well, that's perfect, because it looks very intentional. If you've cut to a wide and somebody's walking up, or somebody's sitting down, it just feels very intentional. So that works incredibly well.
Yeah, I talk quite a bit about the art of storytelling through pictures, which is what camera work is, right? Choosing the shots, getting the shots that are relevant to what is happening at the moment, that helps tell the story about what's going on in the sanctuary. Actually what's going on physically in the sanctuary, or the liturgy, the sermon, the song, the ceremony, whatever, telling that story through pictures. It's a really important thing to keep in mind. It's definitely not random. Right. Exactly, Doug. All right. So, hey, David, thank you so much for coming and for sharing this with us and stepping it through us stepping us through it, because it's you've done an amazing job. First of all, thinking through this in a very logical fashion, breaking it down into its component parts, and then putting those component parts together in sequences that make sense, right? That's a really remarkable thing, and congratulations. Congratulations.
Well, thank you, Marty, and I have to say I really appreciate the opportunity to share it widely, because it's other people have shared things with me that's sparked off ideas, that sparked off patterns of thinking that got me to this point. So it feels the right thing to do to share that back with other folk.
And if anybody wants to message with David or ask questions later on, you can always put a question into the Discord. You can put it into the general channel or any of the technical channels, and put an @ symbol before his name. So if you type @David C, his name should pop up, and you click on that, and he will get pinged, right, with your question, so that he can properly address it. Right, because in the Discord there's a conversation channel about automation. There's one. I don't know if there's one specifically about Streamdeck, but under the technical category, there is where'd it go? I know it's in here. I didn't put one. There's control systems. Number 7, control systems. There you go. That would be a good place for it. Great. So in 2 weeks, we're going to do another case study. Michael Kyer's church is he in Atlanta or is he in Florida? I forget. But we're going to do another case study. He is one of our Hybrid Ministries loyal panelists who isn't here tonight. So, but he has come along with us on this journey, and he was in charge of getting his church all set up. So as we went through the needs analysis process, and we went through all of that, determining the church's goals and aspirations and expectations for their streaming program, long-term, short-term. He worked through all of that with his church, and we're going to see what the result of that was. So that's going to be in 2 weeks. Next week is the Synagogue Tech Forum, and don't get thrown by that. It's while it's specifically geared toward Jewish worship is worship, and they cover some really interesting topics that are maybe not quite as technical as we get here, right? But what they talk about is extremely interesting for any faith, because it's all about figuring out how to do things and how they're doing things. And I find it fascinating, even for a faith that is different from mine, to see how they're thinking through and doing things. It's very fascinating. So tune in next week. That's at 3:00 Eastern time, and it's a webinar, not a meeting. So there's a different login for that. But here on this meeting, we do Mondays as well at 3:00 p.m. And let me look at my calendar to see if we're going to do one this week or not, because I know there was one that I was not available for coming up. Yep, Monday. This Monday, the 21st, looks good. We'll be here. All right. And I want to specifically thank the DVE store for their generous support of the Hybrid Ministries Tech Forum, and our wonderful 1080p high-resolution Zoom account. And I want to thank the Office Hours crew for their for writing and making Mukana available to us. And we hope you've enjoyed it. We hope you've found this informative and enlightening and energizing and enriching and motivating. And remember, if you want to participate on our panel, if you want to come on and add to the conversation, ask questions, present, whatever, just get here 30 minutes early and we'll take care of you. You're welcome to have you. And if you would like to see other shows that are related to media production, such as Office Hours, the Zoom Test Kitchen is really very heavily Zoom oriented and is really high quality. AV Tech Talks talks about all kinds of media production. And of course, the Synagogue Tech Forum. You can find links to those and information on our Discord under related shows. And yep, so that's it for today. And visit the Discord, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. Thank you so much.